Here's My Question for You is a podcast by the creators of My Life in Gaming and Classic Gaming Quarterly, dissecting such important topics of the day as modern social media.
Like, I was like, what's the appeal? Like, if you can only like look at the picture for a minute or something like that,
Yeah.
and it goes away.
Well, it's for sending eggplant pictures, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's what it's for.
Home economics.
The leftover milk is precious because now it's like cinnamon toast milk.
Yeah. And
If it was just plain Cheerios, then it's like you might as well just take the milk and pour it back into the jug, right? Because it didn't.
Geopolitics.
Anyone's listening to this going like, gee, I wonder what Chris's dad looked like. Honestly, just look at a picture of Saddam Hussein. Like, it was very, very close after he shaved his beard off.
The art of conversation.
Nobody's ever said, tell me if this is stupid, and then explained like the concept of matter and antimatter to me.
And the creative process.
I like to take a long shower. And I do like a lot of like thinking of like working out like creative problems like when I'm in the shower.
Check out Here's My Question for You on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Audible, and Spotify, and follow the show on social media at Here's My Podcast. This episode of Classic Gaming Quarterly is brought to you by World of Tanks. By the creators of the award-winning World of Warships, World of Tanks features over 600 vehicles, including destroyers, artillery, and light, medium, and heavy tanks. With over 40 battle arenas, you can drive across open fields and deserts, climb steep hills, sneak through forests, and battle in urban and industrial environments. Free to play on PC, World of Tanks is enjoyed worldwide by over 100 million people and allows you to earn experience and to modify and upgrade your tank. With an emphasis on historical accuracy, World of Tanks features authentic models and vehicle characteristics that make you feel like you're inside a real tank. And this December, Holiday Ops is back. Their biggest in-game event of the year offers tons of rewards, including premium tanks, in-game items, and special missions. Arnold Schwarzenegger returns and is joined by Mila Jovovich, who both can be unlocked as commanders once you complete their character missions. Click the link in the video description to download World of Tanks for PC and use code TANKMANIA during registration to get a premium account free for 7 days, 250,000 credits, the premium tank Excelsior, and 3 additional rental tanks for 10 battles each. And if you're already a fan of the game, be sure to check out World of Tanks merch on Amazon using the link in the video description. On this episode of Classic Gaming Quarterly, let's read Electronic Gaming Monthly issue 25, the Super Nintendo launch issue from August of 1991.
All right, so as stated in the intro, this is Electronic Gaming Monthly issue 25 from August of 1991. And the main reason I wanted to do this issue is that this basically serves as the Super Nintendo launch issue. This would have been on newsstands in like July and August of 1991, just prior to the release of the system. So if you were somebody who was like, eagerly anticipating the Super Nintendo coming out, this is the kind of magazine that maybe you bought and were poring over while you waited for a system that perhaps you pre-ordered or that you had asked for Christmas that year. The only thing I can personally liken it to is the PlayStation 2, because that was the first and maybe the only console I ever bought, like on launch day. And I just remember my best friend and I at the time were reading, like I had an issue of PSM that was like the PS2 launch issue. I think he had some other kind of PlayStation 2 buyer's guide. And, we would just read through those magazines over and over again, just thinking about like what the PlayStation 2 was going to be like, what game or games we were going to pick up at launch, et cetera, et cetera. So, I can just imagine somebody back in 1991 being the exact same way with this issue with the Super Nintendo. So on the cover here, obviously the Super Nintendo takes up the bulk of the real estate. Also noteworthy is the first pictures of the Sega CD-ROM. They mention some new info on the Jaguar 64-bit game system. Do the math. And then over here we've got a few bullet points. Super Preview, Zelda 3 and Mega Man 4. Zelda 3 is, of course, what Link to the Past was called for a while. Explosive International Exclusives, bonus MicroGaming supplement. They've just got a little section there on like handheld gaming. And then one thing I wanted to mention, the last item here, complete CES coverage. So yes, this is the Super Nintendo buyer's guide, which, you know, also another reason I wanted to do this was that the last read through that we did was the Sega Genesis buyer's guide from Megaplay, which is really still just EGM. And so I figured I would do the Super Nintendo this time just to sort of keep the universe in balance. But the difference between the two magazines is that while that was a dedicated Sega Genesis buyer's guide, or just Sega buyer's guide, really, this is just a normal issue of Electronic Gaming Monthly. So there's going to be a ton of other content in here that has nothing to do with the Super Nintendo. But because it's also sort of the CES, Summer CES 1991 issue, there are just a ton of like capsule previews. It's a hard word to say. Capsule previews of just games for every system. I mean, there might even be like 100 of them in here. So I can't spend time talking about each and every game, or this video would be like hours long. So if I gloss over a game that you think is worthy of discussion, you should absolutely bring it up down in the comments section and let us all know why you think so. So turning to the first page, which is really just the inside cover, there's sort of a double ad here for Bill Elliott's NASCAR Challenge for the NES and the Game Boy. And if I remember correctly, I think this was actually developed originally for the DOS PC and then got ported to the NES and the Game Boy. And I guess what's sort of noteworthy about the game is sort of the level of control you have over the setup of your car. Like, it's really not an arcade style racing game at all. So on one hand, it's a technical achievement, especially having it on the NES. But that doesn't necessarily make it fun to play, especially today. Like, you know, these days, if you're going to play, you know, a simulation style racing game, you're probably going to do it on modern hardware. But, you know, back in the day, this was modern hardware, right? Unless you had a home PC. So it's a cool game to check out, but that's about it, really. Like I said, there's far more fun driving games to play on the NES, I would say. Table of contents, nothing really that we need to talk about over there, but on this side is a full page ad for the Robin Hood Prince of Thieves NES game. And, you know, normally when I see movie licensed or TV licensed or whatever licensed video games, you know, your eyes kind of roll a little bit like, oh, this is going to be crappy. But this was a game that I was kind of pleasantly surprised by. And what I kind of wanted to say about it is, you know, when I talk about a game being a weekend rental, and I've explained this before, you know, I don't mean that in a derogatory manner. I just mean that, you know, it's a game that you can get a few days of fun out of, and then you're just sort of done with it. And I think a game like this just exemplifies, you know, the idea of a weekend rental in that, you know, it's really fun, but it closely follows the plot of the movie. So you don't really need to play through it more than once, I don't think. But, you know, I like this movie a lot. I understand, you know, Kevin Costner's bad acting and any other problems someone might have with the movie, but I really enjoyed the movie when it came out. So being able to play this video game version of it was pretty cool. And one other thing I was going to say is that, you know, I don't know if it was the August 1991 issue, but around this same time, there was an issue of Nintendo Power that had this game as the cover story. And, you know, as is often the case with Nintendo Power cover story games, you know, there was like a full walkthrough basically in the magazine. So if you had a subscription to Nintendo Power so that you had that issue, you know, you could rent this game for the weekend and blow through it using the guide. And I think just have a ton of fun. But the only kind of funny thing, I don't know why this is the case or what happened, but I think the movie came out in like June of 91. And then, you know, this issue of this magazine was probably on the newsstands in July, and probably about the same thing for the Nintendo Power issue. But then for some reason, this game got kind of delayed at the last minute and didn't come out until like November. So I guess, not as cool as if you'd been able to play the game right away. And then here's a full 2-page ad for Stormlord. And I know that we've talked about Stormlord before on a magazine read-through. And, I don't remember exactly what I said about it. I probably wasn't anything positive. But, I had a chance to kind of play through the game a little bit more. It was made by this company called Hewson Associates or something like that. And it basically came out for like every home computer in Great Britain. And then it just subsequently got ported to the Genesis. But I think, I was trying to play it, approaching it as like an action platform game, and that's really just not what it is. It's really more of an action puzzle game. Through the levels, there are these little fairies that seem like they're trapped in like crystal balls or something. I'm not really sure. But, the point of the game really is you have to collect the fairies, but you have to figure out how to get to them. So like if there's like a swarm of bees blocking you from getting to the fairy, you can pick up like a pot of honey and go carry it over near the bees so that they move to go get the honey and stuff like that. But so my point is just that it's a far better game than I originally gave it credit for. Next is just a letter from Ed Semrad, and then on the other side here is an ad for WWF Superstars for the Game Boy. And, I don't know if I've mentioned this before or not, but I don't know. I don't really get anything out of these wrestling games. I used to watch WWF wrestling, but it was like in the 80s. And so by this time, I wasn't really watching it anymore. But I could imagine where if like you were a big fan, maybe you would think a game like this is cool because, you can play as like, your favorite wrestler or whatever. But I feel like I'm not the best person to even really comment on it, if that makes sense. Letters to the editor. People were writing in asking for an update on the Sega CD. And then a bunch of people wrote in, well, not a bunch, but like 3 people wrote in asking about Neo-Geo price cuts. And they even mention here in the text that in Japan, as of July 1st, the system has been reduced from $425 to $360, and game prices have been slashed by more than 50%. NOM 1975 is about $100, and the big memory games are about $155. So, still far more than, any other home console. And then they mention in here later, I think that, as to whether the U.S. will follow suit, SNK would not comment. So there you go. And then somebody's writing in asking about the Atari Panther, and the editor just writes back saying that the Panther got killed, but there's a new thing called the Jaguar coming out. And then here's an ad for Adventure Island 2 for the NES. And that's noteworthy because, as I've talked about before, the first Adventure Island was just sort of a retooling of the first Wonder Boy. So Adventure Island 2 is actually like the first, purpose-designed Adventure Island game. And I like all the Adventure Island games. So this is definitely worth playing for me. It shows a little screenshot here that it has like this world map, but it's really just kind of for show. But the cool thing about Adventure Island 2 is you get these Dino Buddies. I don't know if they're actually officially called Dino Buddies or if that's just what people call them. But you can of course ride skateboards in the Adventure Island series. Everybody knows that. But starting with the second one, you can get on the backs of these different dinosaurs. I think there's 4 different dinosaurs in the game, and they each have like their own abilities. And riding the dinosaur, much like riding a skateboard, also just gives you like 1 extra hit point. So that's kind of cool. But I just like the Adventure Island games as a whole, whether on the NES or there was New Adventure Island on the TurboGrafx, or there was a couple of them on the Super Nintendo. I just think they're all really good games. Somebody was writing in asking about what determines magazine size. Because he mentions about how around the holidays they get up to about 200 pages, and then they taper off in the summer and they're barely 100 pages. I mean, obviously more games come out closer to Christmas, so there's the obvious answer, but I think sometimes they also pack the ads into the magazines around the holidays as well. And over here's an ad for Might and Magic, Gate to Another World. It's kind of weird. I've never really played any of the Might and Magic games, which is funny because in the early 90s, I was really big into PC gaming. And I think it's 3 Might and Magic games came out like while I was an active PC gamer. But I guess I just didn't know anybody that had any of them. Because, we used to all just, trade games at school. I'm trying to remember which Might and Magic game this is a port of. I want to say it was Might and Magic 3, but don't quote me on that. More letters still. So this person mentions, I saw your links insert in another magazine. That was just because EGM started sort of making side money, making, basically multi-page ads for game companies. And so I guess the links ad that the EGM people made ended up in another magazine. But I thought the second thing was a lot funnier, just because I remember Corey mentioning how Phantasy Star 2 got kind of ruined for him because it came with a hint book. And, as a kid who didn't really have any self-control, he just used the hint book to blow through the game. But this Eric guy, I guess, has a different opinion. He says, second, I hope you guys are happy. I called Sega, and the Phantasy Star 3 book is, as you stated, separate and not included with the game. I will now have to pay $70 for the game and then another $20 for the book. So I guess Eric was seeing it more as a value proposition, getting the book with the game. Anyway, over here is an ad for Frankenstein from Bondi. I don't know. Frankenstein, it's got obviously it's not really actually even based on the story. It's got Frankenstein's monster as, the main bad guy, but it's not like it follows the plot of the book or anything. Only thing really good I can say about it is it has a pretty cool intro cinematic, but the gameplay itself sucks pretty bad. And then here's an ad for PGA Tour Golf. And, one thing I thought of when I was looking at this is, I know sometimes I complain about game companies having ads and not showing screenshots. Because to me, it's like, well, why would you not show the game unless you're trying to hide that the game doesn't look very good? But I feel like EA managed to kind of get away with that just because the graphic design of their ads was so good. I mean, you really only have a handful of screenshots that take up hardly any of the real estate, but just the way the ad is put together, just showing the scorecards and everything, something about it just makes it seem like, wow, there must be, this game must have a lot of realism to it. And that's not limited to the PGA Tour golf ad. It's just how all of EA Sports ads were back then. Then we get started with reviews, but before we do that, I just wanted to quickly point out Kabuki Quantum Fighter. And just the reason for that is Kabuki Quantum Fighter is a side-scrolling action platformer that, I would put sort of in the same category as the Power Blade games or maybe even Batman, even though that's a licensed game, obviously. Just sort of non-A-list titles that I think are still, Shatterhand would be another one, that are still just really solid games. And Kabuki Quantum Fighter it's a tough game. There's a lot of cheap deaths. It, I would say, borrows liberally from the Ninja Gaiden series, especially number 2, but that doesn't mean that it can't be a fun game. So it's worth checking out. And the other thing I would just say is that, there really aren't too many games on the NES anymore that are good that you can still get relatively cheaply. But Kabuki Quantum Fighter you can get for about $20, which, sad as it is, these days is pretty cheap for an NES game. So check it out, Kabuki Quantum Fighter. Oh, I was going to say, you whip people, you have long red hair and you whip people with your hair. That's one of your weapons. I don't even know what that's all about, but it looks pretty cool. But anyway, getting over here to the review crew. So these are the very first Super Nintendo reviews to appear in EGM. So I think that's pretty cool. The first one naturally has to be Super Mario World, which up here they still have listed as Super Mario Brothers 4 because, that's what it was called in Japan. It was Super Mario Brothers 4 Super Mario World. But then down here in the text, they refer to it as Super Mario World. But anyway, you can see they give it straight 9s. I think sort of the main complaint that the review crew had, which is kind of one of the main complaints that you would see from gamers, like if you went and checked out old Usenet posts, is that, I think people were just sort of expecting more as far as like, I don't know, as far as like what, I don't know. It's still a Super Mario Brothers game. It takes advantage of a lot of the hardware capabilities that the Super Nintendo has above and beyond the NES, as far as having like awesome music, using like, sprite scaling and rotation and having some Mode 7 stuff. But, these people that complain that like, oh, well, I thought that it was going to be a bigger step forward. I don't know what exactly it is that they were really looking for. I think Super Mario Brothers, or Super Mario World is an amazing game. It might be my favorite Super Mario Brothers game. I don't really know about that, but I have a soft spot, of course, for the original because it was my first video game. But and they mention in here like how huge the game is. I forgot how many levels the first game has, but it's like 100, or just shy of 100. And when you compare that to say like Sonic the Hedgehog, which I love that game too, but relatively short game. But you can sit down and beat that game in like 45 minutes. And you're not beating Super Mario World in 45 minutes unless you know all the tricks to use, the warp whistles or whatever the game has. So anyway, and then the next game that they show here is actually not even a launch game, although it was, close enough, I guess, a launch window game. And that's Gradius 3. They give that one straight 8s. And I would say their main complaint about the game is slowdown, although they're calling it flicker. I think people normally called it flicker back then, but what they're really referring to is just slowdown. Obviously now, well, maybe not obviously, I don't know how many people out there know this, but this guy named, I'm probably not going to say his name right, but it's like Vitor Villela, who's like a ROM hacking guy, has developed a way to add SA1 chip support to some of these old games. So you can patch the Gradius 3 ROM to add SA1 support. And then you can either make yourself a reproduction cartridge, or you can just play it on a flash cart or an emulator, but it completely gets rid of the slowdown in Gradius 3. And without the slowdown, the game is so much more difficult. Because Gradius 3 runs a lot faster than the first two Gradius games, or Gradii perhaps, but really awesome game. But an 8 is a fair score because the slowdown really is very bad. F-Zero gets 2 8s and 2 9s. It's crazy that it's a launch game because it's one of my all-time favorite Super Nintendo games. In fact, there was only 3 games available on launch day, and easily 2 of them are among my favorite Super Nintendo games. And I like Pilot Wings quite a bit, but I wouldn't really put it at the same level as the other 2. But I never get tired of playing F-Zero. And in fact, when I did that launch episode, I think maybe I talked about F-Zero a little bit too much, because one of the common complaints I get in the comments on that video is that I spent too much time talking about F-Zero. And then next to that is Final Fight. And you see the Final Fight gets an 8 and 3 7s. And, the complaints are the obvious ones, and they're the same for all of them, which is that it's missing a character, which I don't really understand. Like, I don't know, like, does Final Fight just use like almost every last byte available on the ROM, so they had no choice but to take out Guy? I don't know. I've never really looked into what the answer or the explanation is for that. And then, the other main complaint is that you can't play 2-player simultaneous, which, to me is like one of the defining features of any beat 'em up game, is being able to play, couch co-op with a buddy. And so like those are very fair complaints. So the fact that it gets the scores that it does, I don't think you can really criticize that. But, that all being said, it's still a great game. And, if I had been older at the time and had money and had a Super Nintendo, I'm sure I would have bought Final Fight when it came out. And but then this is just sort of one of the more iconic video game magazine pages that I've come across while doing my show, just because you have Final Fight and then right next to it you have Streets of Rage. And of course we talked about Streets of Rage for the umpteenth time in the last magazine read through. So and I don't really have anything to add, but I'll just to show you, here you go. It gets straight 9s because it does the things correctly that Final Fight is sadly missing. Over here is an ad for Adventures of Lolo 3. If you've never played the Adventures of Lolo games, in my opinion, you should. It was made, they were all made rather, by HAL, who is probably most famous, I would assume, for the Kirby series. But over in Japan, these Adventures of Lolo games were called Eggerland, and they started out on Japanese home computers. And then they started making them, porting the games over from home computers to the Famicom. And then obviously we got some of those games here. And they're like single screen action puzzle games, I guess. It's basically like, trying to figure out just how to get, open up the exit to the level and get to it. But they're just really, really fun games. So, and not a lot of replay value, I guess, because once you figure out how to beat all the levels, you're just kind of done, I suppose. But there's 3 of the games on the NES, so there you go. And then over here, so this is 3 Genesis reviews, but all 3 of these are games that we talked about in the last read-through, so I don't really want to spend too much time talking about them. I'll just say that Fantasia, even 3 6s and a 5, that's like being too generous for that game, which is horrible. I'm kind of surprised to see someone give Alien Storm only a 6. Like, you're going to say Fantasia's a 6, and then the same guy, that's Steve, I believe, on the top, is also going to say that Alien Storm is a 6? I don't think so. But then just over here, I'm just glad to see that Hardball got pretty good scores. Ed gave it an 8. So he says, easily one of the best playing baseball games around. So that's cool, just because I like Hardball a lot, but I feel like it doesn't get a lot of respect from people. And then over here is an ad from Renovation for Arcus Odyssey. And it features this guy, I don't know how to say his name, David Izat or Izat. Same thing, like David Izat, professional gamer, just like Jamie Bunker, who, was in the Gyrus ads. But while Jamie Bunker, I believe, was just a game tester at Renovation, David here was on Arcus Odyssey. He's listed as a producer, but then I think he worked with the localization team on 3 other games. The only one I can remember off the top of my head is Granada. But, Renovation was just this company in the US that would distribute Telenet games that came out, in Japan, like the Valise games and El Viento. And like I said, Granada, Gyrus, Arcus Odyssey. And so it was guys apparently like David who would do the localization for the American market. So, but Arcus Odyssey, pretty cool game. It's like an action RPG. I think this is the second time I've had to play some Arcus Odyssey for the show. And both times it's just made me feel like, I want to come back to this game and play it some more when I have time. I mean, it's not perfect, but it plays kind of similarly to like Gauntlet as far as like, it's an overhead view, although here it's like an isometric overhead view, but you kill bad guys and find items in chests and get into boss battles and whatnot. And it's just got, it's got pretty good graphics, good music, good sound effects. It's just a cool game. So if you're looking for something to play, definitely check out Arcus Odyssey. Oh, one other thing I would say. So these Arcus games apparently it was a series of role-playing games in Japan. But They were more like traditional role-playing games, and I think they were on Japanese home PC once again. But they got released as a trilogy, like it was the Arcus Odyssey 1 through 3 trilogy that had been like, not remastered, but redone or whatever. And it was released on the Mega CD, but only in Japan. And then Arcus Odyssey is just more of like an action RPG set in, I suppose, the same universe. More reviews here, some NES reviews, or a couple anyway. You've got The Little Mermaid, which you see Steve only gives that one a 5. And I haven't played too much Little Mermaid. I can't really comment on it too much. They talk about how, it's nice because you have like a family game or whatever. And I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to decide, like, is Little Mermaid a kid's game, any more than like DuckTales? DuckTales obviously is aimed at people who were watching DuckTales back then, but I feel like it's a hard enough game that you weren't going to give it to like a 6-year-old, were you? Or maybe you were, I don't know. But the game, it's another Capcom Disney licensed game. And to me, it seemed okay, but not the kind of thing that I would really feel the need to play. But then next to it is an ad for that Robin Hood game that I already talked about. And I thought the reviews here were interesting. Like Steve here says, I saw the movie and the best thing in it was the king, and he only occupied 30 seconds of film. So Steve is saying the best thing about Prince of Thieves was Sean Connery showing up at the end and not Alan Rickman playing the Sheriff of Nottingham. Yeah, I don't know about that. But, I don't know. I guess obviously he doesn't like the movie. And I feel like if you don't like the movie, there's no reason to play the game. That's fair. But his first statement, I take serious umbrage with. And then Ed says, not much of an action game, but isn't supposed to be. Thank you. As a quest game, it will make you think, and more games should be made this way. Graphics are okay, but not exceptional. I agree. The quest is about the right length and rather straightforward. No real tough spots to stump the player. And then I forgot who the third reviewer is, but the fourth one is Sushi X. And I just feel like Sushi X and me are like on the same wavelength as far as this game goes. He says, cool. If you like the movie, you'll love the adventure. Taken directly from the movie template, Robin Hood makes you feel like you're actually playing the movie by following the action scene by scene. In other words, it's a tremendous translation to the home entertainment screen. And that's exactly how I feel. The one thing I will say, though, about Robin Hood, especially because it's the screenshot they chose to use, there's like 3 different like sort of game modes that it switches between, depending on what you're doing. There's like an overhead. The most common mode is an overhead view where you're sort of closer up. But then there'll be certain scenes where you're fighting like a whole bunch of people. And then it's like overhead, but it's pulled way back. So there's all these little tiny sprites on the screen. And that's still pretty cool. But then there's a third game mode that's like side-scrolling when you have to fight one-on-one against like some other person. And like there's one right at the beginning of the game where you have to get into like a sword fight with somebody. And the game plays a little bit too much like Sword of Sodan for the Genesis or originally for the Amiga. And I really don't like that game. So they could have taken out those parts of the game and I would have been fine with that. And then lastly over here is, they're calling it Bonk 2. They of course mean Bonk's Revenge, which gets 2 7 and 2 8s. I don't know if I agree with giving the game a 7, but that's okay, opinions and whatnot. But I think Bonk 2 is like pretty much universally considered to be the best game in the Bonk series. If you like Bonk games, you don't need me to tell you about Bonk games, but I guess if you don't know, if you're going to play one Bonk game, you should play Bonk's Revenge. It's, all the things that were great about the first Bonk, but just more, like there's more power-ups, there's, special stages, the stages are bigger, it's still got the gorgeous, colorful graphics and the great music. I mean, the controls, I don't know, Bonk in general, the Bonk games control a little bit sluggishly, so it's just something that you have to deal with. But a great game. And then I thought this was kind of funny over here on the other side. One thing I noticed consistently when talking about old video games is how much more cavalierly game developers would kind of steal from, TV and from movies. I'm thinking of like, Splatterhouse, where the main character is obviously Jason. And I don't think you'd ever get away with that now. Or like, since it came up earlier, Nom 1975 for the Neo-Geo, and how it straight up used like still frames from Full Metal Jacket. Again, you wouldn't get away with that now. This isn't quite the same way, but it just sort of makes me think about how like they would just take stuff. And that's with Street Smart, they put up here, to be the man, you got to beat the man. And it's funny because I just got done saying how, I'm not really much of a wrestling fan. And even I know that was like one of Ric Flair's like, main like taglines that he would say. So like the fact that they would even put that there just seems, like, I don't know, whatever. But Street Smart, not a very good game. So that's really all I have to say about it. More reviews. Mega Man over here, isn't that Mega Man Dr. Wily's Revenge? I think it's the first Mega Man for the Game Boy. And I think it's like 4 of the bosses from the first Mega Man. And you play through, then you play normally, you play through a stage and you get to the boss and you beat it. But like when you're playing the game, the stage select only has 4 bosses instead of 8. But then I think once you beat the 4 bosses, you have to fight 4 more bosses. And those are Robot Masters, isn't that what they're called? And those are from Mega Man 2. So it's not, I don't know, it's not bad. I mean, it's hard. It's a Mega Man game, right? And it's on the Game Boy, so the controls are not quite as crisp, but I'm not surprised at the scores that it gets. Because back then, it's like if you wanted to play Mega Man on the go, compromises had to be made. But, it was a solid title. But speaking of solid titles, far less well-known game here is Fortified Zone. And I don't really know how to describe Fortified Zone. It's like... it's not really like Smash TV, but like in some ways it's like, or maybe like Metal Gear, kind of like it's a bunch of single screens. Like you're walking through like a building, but each screen is like one room in the building, and you have to like, kill all the enemies and collect whatever items you need. And then finally you go like fight a boss or whatever. But it's a pretty fun game. And I'm surprised that I'd never really heard of it, just because I guess I would think it would be more popular. And then the last one here, I don't even really have anything to say about. Pac-Land. I don't know, what else did it come out on besides... It was on the TurboGrafx, right? And then the Lynx. I don't know. I never saw the appeal of the Pac-Land. Like, I'd rather just play regular Pac-Man. Why did you need to make a Pac-Man platforming game? I don't know. Over here is probably the most early 90s looking Sega ad ever from Software Etc. Next page. Oh, here's an ad for Bonk's Revenge. So there you go. And earlier I was talking about criticizing game ads for not showing enough screenshots, and certainly TurboGrafx games have been guilty of that. But so it's nice to see here that you have 3 screenshots, but screenshots that are maybe even a little bit bigger than what you normally see in an ad. Vic Tokai presents the games of August 1991. So these are games that should be appearing in stores imminently. For the NES, you got Ninja Gaiden 3, NES Open Tournament Golf. Those are pretty good. Oh, Vice Project Doom. We're going to talk about that one later. That's actually a very good game. For the Genesis, Alien Storm, Arcus Odyssey, NHL Hockey. That's cool. Spider-Man. Did Spider-Man come out in 91, or did that got delayed a bunch of times? I don't know if it got delayed again after this or not. There's Bonk's Revenge for the TurboGrafx. Neo-Geo, you got Burning Fight. So Burning Fight was kind of their like rip-off game of Final Fight, but pretty fun game. Gaming Gossip. So it's the Quartermann column. But I think there were a few things in the Quartermann column that were worth pointing out. The main things, I don't remember what's up here. It's like I don't want to sit here and read all this text while you guys are sitting there waiting. But the main thing I wanted to talk about anyway was the second paragraph. There were CDs aplenty at the recent CES in Chicago, with both NEC and Sega unveiling, albeit behind closed doors, the latest that the technology could muster up, blah, blah, blah. But then the third paragraph is where things get juicy. I mean, this is very famous, but it's just fun to see it being reported at the time. Nintendo made their own story at the CES by giving Sony a cold, icy one when the head honchos of Mario Land decided to use the Force, I don't know what that is all about, and choose the other side, Philips. While Quartermann will refrain from calling them the Big P, Philips is the force behind the CD. After all, they invented the thing, and their aim is to standardize the marketplace. Magnavox had a machine working at CES, and the rumor is that Nintendo wanted to attend the same party. Sony, meanwhile, has brushed aside Nintendo's response and elected to go it their own. While Nintendo says they won't support it, Sony will nevertheless bring out their own CDI system based around the Super NES called the PlayStation. Yes, Q fans, another game system is on the way. So, it's something that we hear over and over again, and I just think it's so cool to see there it is being reported in EGM. Over here, an ad from Natsume. Probably Natsume. And I'm not so worried about the Game Boy games, but you've got a couple of cool NES games there. First is Shadow of the Ninja. So, all the stuff that I just got done saying about Kabuki Quantum Fighter and sort of the games I would lump it in with, I would say the same thing about Shadow of the Ninja. It's a pretty cool, worth checking out side-scrolling action game. It's very difficult, lots of cheap deaths. And unlike Kabuki Quantum Fighter, if you want a physical copy of Shadow of the Ninja, you're going to pay for it. So I'm not telling anybody to do that. But if you've never played it, load it up in an emulator, flash cart, etc. And then the other game. So I don't understand where this all came from. So the other game over here is SCAT, which apparently stands for Special Cybernetic Attack Team. And, I think we all know what else SCAT means. And so, when you see that, you just can't help but make the association and go, oh, SCAT, that must be like a crappy game. And on top of that, I mean, the box art is pretty terrible, but it's actually a cool game. It plays very similarly. Well, no, it doesn't. It's kind of reminiscent, I would say, of Forgotten Worlds, but you can't rotate your character around like you can in Forgotten Worlds, but you're like a floating person. And it's a mostly horizontally scrolling shooter. It's like Mr. Heli, where like it'll switch from horizontally scrolling to vertically scrolling, but your character still stays oriented the same way. But in Japan, the game was released as Final Mission, and then in Europe, it was released as like Action in New York. So like, who made the decision to call it SCAT here? I don't know, but it's got cool music, but it's like I said, it's a pretty cool game, and it's just like, I definitely would have judged that book by its cover, but I would have been wrong to do so. 2-page ad for Phantasy Star 3, which I have never played, but this ad makes me want to play it. So here's some news from the Tokyo Toy Show. Sega of Japan unveils the Mega CD. And so there you can see a version of the Mega CD. I don't know if that's the final version. I don't remember the Mega CD having that many LEDs on the front. But, I mean, I've never owned a Japanese Mega CD. So what do I know? But, they just go over some of the system's capabilities, what it's adding to the Genesis besides the obvious, which is CD support. Over here is an ad for Videomation, which, really primarily is just like giving your Nintendo the ability to do something similar to like Microsoft Paint. So I guess. And then over here, more CD-ROM news. Here's an early mock-up of the PlayStation when, of course, it was still meant to be something that could play Super Famicom games. But like over here, So, a few pages ago, they're talking about NEC unveiling new CD-ROM technology or whatever. But of course, the original Turbo CD had long been out. But what they were talking about here is that first you've got the PC Engine Duo, which looks exactly like what we got here as the original, the only Turbo Duo we had here. But of course, there were various hardware iterations of it in Japan. But then also the CD-ROM 2, which directly connected to the PC Engine or SuperGrafx rather than you having to use the interface unit, which, here we had that weird looking big interface unit. In Japan, they had that really cool briefcase unit. And then down here is just a CDI. Over here is an ad for Micronet. You've got Raiden Trad on the top, which is really just yet another home port of Raiden, although there is one bonus level added to it. So that's exciting. And then Warrior of Rome, which I personally have never played. Next is an ad for the Game Gear, and this is a pretty iconic ad. I think they kind of riffed on this exact design with a few different games as far as what they would show playing on the Game Gear. Here it's Columns, which was of course the pack-in game, and then like over here they've got little screenshots of G-Lock, Super Monaco GP, Shinobi, and Castle of Illusion. I know I've mentioned it before, but I almost got a Game Gear. I had saved up my money, and I went to the store to buy a Game Gear, and they were out of stock. And then for whatever reason, I just didn't get one. I don't know what happened. I don't know what I did with the money. International Outlook. So here's more news from the Tokyo Toy Show. They mention Zelda 3 for the Super Famicom, which once again is just Link to the Past. Galaxy Force 2 for the Mega Drive, which is like a super scalar rail shooter. Mega Man 4 for the Famicom, which I think comes up again later in the issue. I'm not sure. Mega Man 4, I don't know what Mega Man fans thought about that game when it was coming out. Of course, Dr. Wily was ostensibly killed at the end of Mega Man 3. So maybe people weren't expecting a Mega Man 4. But, without spoiling it, it turns out that Dr. Wily wasn't dead. Shocker, I know. And then over here, 1941 for the SuperGrafx. Again, I could swear this gets mentioned again later in the issue. I'm not really sure, but that's a 1941 Counterattack, I think it was called, for the SuperGrafx. Of course, the SuperGrafx only ever had a few games come out for it, but at least in the case of 1941 Counterattack, I think it was the only way to play the game for quite some time. Over here's an ad for Ultimate Basketball by American Sammy. And, generally speaking, whenever I see American Sammy, I just think, oh, that's going to be a bad game, because usually it's not a very good game. Although there's an important exception to that, which we'll talk about in a minute. Ultimate Basketball it's not terrible. It does have slam dunk animations, thank goodness. In fact, it even shows them here on the ad. But, it's just, why would you play this when you could play Double Dribble, is what I would say. And before we even go over here, so this is what I was going to say. This is the exception. Vice Project Doom has to be the best game that American Sammy ever published here in North America. Really awesome game. Very cinematic. You start the game and it's almost like Spy Hunter, like you're driving overhead, you're shooting everything in front of you, and then there's a boss battle, and then after that's over, you get the title screen, which is like very movie-esque. But then there's like cutscenes between each level. It's just a really cool game, I think. But once again, like, look at that box art. I mean, it's terrible. So, as somebody who, most of the games that I had back when I was a kid was like somebody taking me to Toys R Us and basically saying, pick one. And so I had to go off of the box art. So based on that, there was no way that I was ever going to take Vice Project Doom home. And that would have been a shame, because it's a really, really cool game. And then just sort of as a little bonus factoid, Sammy ended up much, much later, but ended up merging with Sega. So now Sega and Sammy are like the same company. And so yeah, over here, so I thought there was a feature on Mega Man 4. I don't know what else at this point I need to really say. The only thing I'll say, Mega Man 4, I think, is like markedly more difficult than the previous games in the series. And one thing that stands out for me, and I'm saying this as somebody who likes the Mega Man games, but you know, one of sort of the obstacle mechanisms that they used designing these games is like the jump that you can just barely make, right? Where it's like, oh, you only have like a couple extra pixels of wiggle room to barely make this jump. And I feel like Mega Man 4 kind of goes to that well like one too many times, and it's a little bit annoying, but it's still a Mega Man game, and it's still absolutely worth playing. It's just, I think it's a little bit more frustrating than the first three games. And then down here is a little preview for Ys 3, Wanderers from Ys. And, you know, I think it's sort of famous by now that, you know, with Ys 3, it became a side-scrolling game instead of an overhead game. And, you know, people that are really into like Ys Book 1 and 2 generally seem to not care for the third installment. I have not played Ys 3, so I don't really have an opinion. And next page. So again, I'm assuming that, I mean, does it ever make this clear? I mean, I'm assuming that this is all basically stuff that they got from the Tokyo Toy Show, right? This is all the International Outlook section. So here we've got Kid Nicky 2 for the Famicom. I think I played the first Kid Nicky. Isn't that Kid Nicky Radical Ninja? Or am I getting confused? I think I rented that one when I was a kid. Kid Nicky 2, I honestly don't remember if that game actually came out here or not. Over here is a horse racing game for the PC Engine. I'm pretty sure it's not just called Horse Racing, but I don't recall the name of this game. Is horse racing just really popular? I'm asking honestly in Japan, because there's a lot of horse racing games that come out over there, but I don't ever hear about like actual Japanese horse racing. So I don't really know. But yeah, I've never played the game, so no opinion there. Down here is F1 Hero 2. So that is Satoru Nakajima F1 Hero. The first one ended up coming out here in the US, actually distributed by American Sammy. Another, actually, though, good game from American Sammy. We got that as it was Michael Andretti World GP. And just because it had, you know, they slapped Michael Andretti's face on the box, but he's not in the game or anything. But yeah, I mean, cool game, I guess, kind of worth checking out. But I guess, again, I would say the same thing I said about Bill Elliott, which is like, you could play it just to check it out, but you know, you wouldn't play it because you wanted to play a simulation racing game now. And then over here, this one's kind of interesting. So from Irem, this is what they're calling Cycle Grand Prix. And so, you know, I don't know if these are screenshots from a Famicom game that was being worked on and got shown at the Tokyo Toy Show. The screenshots look exactly like a PC Engine game called Racing Damashi, made by Irem. I mean, it is this game. This is Racing Damashi, which is like a MotoGP game. But it never came out for the Famicom, so I don't know if they were just showing, because it really looks just like the PC Engine game. So I don't know if they were just showing the PC Engine game and saying, "Oh yeah, we're gonna port this to the Famicom," or you know, who knows. Up here is Outrun for the Mega Drive, and I feel like sometimes I see people online being pretty down on the Mega Drive and Genesis version of Outrun. I'm not really sure why. I enjoy playing it. The only thing I would say, I guess, is I don't understand why it wasn't released until 1991. Just because, you know, Outrun came out in the arcades in like 1986. And then it was ported to the Master System the next year in 87. And so wouldn't you have thought that like Outrun would have been like a 1989 Genesis game? Like I don't understand why it wasn't, because it was certainly a popular game. But it is what it is. But I still enjoy playing the game. I think when it came out, I mean, somebody tell me I'm wrong, but I feel like when it came out in 91, it was the best way to play Outrun at home. And that was probably the case until the Sega Ages game came out on the Sega Saturn. Next down here is a game called Undeadline for the Mega Drive. And that's like, it's a shooter, but it's like Elemental Master. Like it's a shooter, but you're just like a dude walking up the screen. Really, in my opinion, not a good game at all. I saw online somebody had said like, oh, it's known for its difficulty. But, I think you have to make a distinction between, a game being difficult because it's made for people who are like enthusiasts of the genre versus a game that's difficult because it's just poorly designed. And like, I would say that about Undeadline. Like it's difficult, but don't hear me say that and then say, oh, I'm really into shooters, I'm looking for something difficult, because this is difficult in the wrong way. It's not difficult in a way that makes you want to keep playing it and get better. And then down here is Galaxy Force 2, which, to me, it's just a rail shooter, and I don't get too excited about it. I know some people really like Galaxy Force 2. I've never played the arcade version. I bet that's probably pretty cool, but it's not the kind of game I would have wanted to pick up on the Genesis. Here is a 2-page vertical ad from Enix from before the Squeenix days. You got Dragon Warrior 3 up top here, and I can't remember if I've played Dragon Warrior 3 or not, to be honest. I know I used to have it, but like I played Dragon Warrior 1 and 2 on the Game Boy. I mean, I played Dragon Warrior on the NES, but then later I played it again on the Game Boy Color. And I know I have Dragon Warrior 3 for the Game Boy Color, but I don't know if I've played it. But then probably, I think more interestingly, is down here, you've got ActRaiser. So, which not a launch game for the Super Nintendo, but a very, very early game. And then, I don't know, I can maybe try to zoom in on this when I'm editing the video or something. I just think it's funny, because they've got the NES logo over here for Dragon Warrior 3. And then I guess they didn't have a Super Nintendo logo to put here, so they just kind of like made one. So it's the same entertainment system from the NES, and then, the Nintendo font for Nintendo, but then it's just like they just typed out Super in like Times New Roman or something. I just think it looks kind of funny, but whatever. And then up here is Super League 91 for the Mega Drive. And I guess I would just say that's kind of noteworthy because we got that game here as Sports Talk Baseball. I've mentioned this before, but the first Super League game we got is Tommy Lasorda Baseball. And then the follow-up Super League 91 we got here as Sports Talk Baseball. Sadly, in Japan, you don't have the gameplay, the play-by-play voice, because I think that would have been so cool if you could play the game in Japanese and have like a Japanese play-by-play guy. I don't know why. I think that would be pretty cool, but you don't have that, so it just plays like a normal baseball game. And it was just, I guess, Sega of America that said like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if it had like play-by-play? But it's a pretty cool game. I don't know if it's just me. Maybe I just suck, but I struggle to even get hits when I'm playing Sports Talk Baseball, and I seem to do fine with other baseball games, so I don't really know. And then down here is Ambition of Caesar 2. Looks like a strategy game. I don't know anything about it at all. And then over here is an ad for Rockin' Cats. And it's weird. I feel like for a game that seems like it must be pretty uncommon, like I don't ever see copies of Rockin' Cats, I sure see this ad in a lot of magazines. Here is Valise 4 for the PC Engine, which never came out here. I think we got I think there were two, right? I think there were two Valise games that came out on the TurboGrafx or Turbo CD, but Valise 4 only came out for the PC Engine. Super CD, I assume. Well, I don't know that for a fact. And then down here is 1941 Counterattack for the SuperGrafx, which we already discussed. I guess it's a prequel, apparently, to 1942. Makes sense, since it's the year before. It's a cool game if you like the 1940X games. And like I said, that was the only way to play 1941 Counterattack at home until like the Capcom arcade collections started coming out. But more interesting, at least for me as a shooter guy, is down here they're calling it Starfighter, but what this is Star Peroger. So it's like the parody game in the Soldier series on the PC Engine. I would say I highly recommend that you play Star Peroger, especially like if you're someone that likes shooters. It's a fun game to play. It's very relaxing. If you're reasonably good at shooters, you're going to find the game to be like super easy. But the flip side of that is that if you're somebody who's interested in shooters, but you find them frustrating because you feel like you're not good at them, you should check out Star Peroger. And then I think, the thing that a lot of people get excited about with Star Peroger is that you can play as a PC Engine. You have 3 playable characters. You have Bomberman, you have the spaceship from the Soldier games, and then you have a PC Engine that you can play as. So, it's pretty cool. And then here is Spud's Adventure for the Game Boy, which I've never played, but I hear is very terrible. And then we've got a couple of Game Boy games. Sagaya, which, is, I guess, sort of a port of the Genesis game Sagaya, which is Darius 3. I think it's Darius 3, right? No, Darius 2. Sorry, it's Darius 2. I've never been super into the Darius games. Like, to me, it's like if you want to play a Darius game, just get Darius Gaiden, and that's the best one. So that's the one you should play. But, it's not bad. For the Game Boy, I would say, I was impressed. It runs pretty well, but it never came out here. So if you have a flash card or something, then you can just load it up that way. But if you're looking for a cartridge, you'll have to get a Japanese cartridge. And then this Roston game, I'm not sure that ever came out. Like I remember I saw this and I'm like, well, I'll Google it. And I didn't really come up with anything. So either I'm bad at Googling or the game didn't come out. It wouldn't be an old issue of EGM if there wasn't a Die Hard ad. So there you go. And then we've talked about these Pandemonium ads enough. I'm not going to do that again. Because plus now we're finally here after however many pages it's been. We're finally here to the Super NES section, which is why we're all here, let's be honest. Over 30 games reviewed. First we have to see an ad for EGM's 1-900 number, and then we get into the Super Nintendo. So again, this is like assuming that, obviously we didn't really have the internet back then, so you were sort of on a forced information diet when it came to this kind of stuff. So like I said, if you were somebody who was excited about the Super NES coming out, this might be the most information that you had gotten up to that point, because here's a picture of the actual North American Super Nintendo along with the controller. They go into some details about the system, its processor, the Sony sound chip. They mention Mode 7 and what that means, and then of course they show Pilot Wings, which was at the time probably the best demonstration of Mode 7. And then down here, they just talk a little bit about some of the games that are going to be coming out. But then in the following pages, they go into more detail about the games that are coming out. So this section is a little bit less than super useful, because now we get into game reviews. And the first one they've got up here is ActRaiser. So a lot of these games, I'll just say, are games that I talked about on the Super Nintendo in 1991 video. But at this point, I think I made that video like 5 years ago. So I'm sure there's plenty of things that I don't even remember at this point. But ActRaiser was and still is an awesome game. Some people don't like it. It's taking two very different genres and putting them together, in that you have sort of that overhead, almost sim style, God game aspect, and then it switches over and it's a side-scrolling action game. But personally, I think that's cool. And then of course everybody knows this. The soundtrack was written by Yuzo Koshiro, so it's awesome music as you would expect from him, but very different. Everybody knows Yuzo Koshiro from Streets of Rage 1 and 2 and Revenge of Shinobi. and those have more of like a techno style soundtrack, and that wouldn't really work with ActRaiser, so it's got more of sort of a symphonic, if you will, soundtrack. Next is Super Baseball Simulator. So it's actually Super Baseball Simulator 1000, and it's like the Super Nintendo follow-up to Baseball Simulator 1000 on the NES. And I mean, it's like a solid baseball game, just as like a regular baseball game, but then on the team selection screen, like the third option down is to play in the Ultra League, and then it's not at all simulation style anymore. It's like it's very much more like arcade style, but like even more so than something like Baseball Stars 2, like with all the crazy power-ups that the pitchers get and the power-ups that the hitters get. It's a super, super fun baseball game. So if you have even a passing interest in old sports games, you should definitely check out Super Baseball Simulator 1000, but just skip directly to playing in the Ultra League, because that is the most fun part. Down here is Big Run, and that was originally, there's an arcade game by Jalico called Big Run. It's a rally game, like you're playing, it's going from Tripoli in Libya to I forgot where in West Africa. So, sort of like most of the Paris-Dakar rally. Maybe this game ends in Dakar, I don't remember. But, I mean, it's a cool rally game. It's similar to, Victory Run, I think is like that, where, various parts in your car will start to wear down or break, and you have to get them fixed, and then you lose time. But it's a cool game. I'm trying to remember if... I don't believe it ever came out here. I think you have to get the Japanese version. But I think most of the game is in English, so you don't need to... you can play the Japanese version and it's fine. And if you're going to play an old sports game, I feel like at least something like that kind of has its own character. I don't really understand why it gets such poor scores from these people. They're saying, well, the graphics are a little bit choppy, and well, yeah, a little bit, but not really anything all that bad. I'm surprised it would get 4s. I think it's a cool game. Down here is this game Bomboozle, which was originally, I want to say, written for the Amiga, and was later ported to the Super Famicom. We got Bomboozle here in North America, but for whatever reason, they changed the name to Kablooey, which, I mean, I don't know, I guess, but I think Bomboozle was probably better. But
Player 1, get ready.
I mean, it's an action puzzle game. It's definitely not bad. I don't know, the main character is like really creepy looking, I think. Like, it looks like if you took like Grover from the Muppets and like Grimace from the McDonald's cartoons and put them together. And I don't know, he's kind of creepy, but it's like you're basically having to set off certain bombs in order while not getting killed yourself. And as far as action puzzler games go, just thinking about games we already talked about in this issue, I would much rather play any of the Adventures of Lolo games, but Kablooey is not horrible. Up here is Darius Twin. So like I said, I'm just not super into the Darius games. I remember talking about Darius Twin in that 1991 video. It's like very okay. It's just, when I think about some of the shooters that came out in the early days of the Super Nintendo, I can just think of games that I would rather play than Darius Twin. I believe it gets the name Twin because you can play the game 2-player. So I guess that's cool. And then down here is Final Fight, but we already saw the review. I don't know how much of the text in here is similar to what we already saw, but you see it gets 2 8s and 2 7s. Is that what it got before? I thought it got like an 8 and 3 7s before. I don't really remember, but we already talked about it anyway. Same thing with F-Zero. Discussed that already. Gradius 3. It's kind of annoying, I think, that they're putting the same content in 2 parts of the magazine, but I wonder if this was originally meant to be a separate little insert or something. Next page, hole-in-one up here. That's Hal's Hole-in-One Golf, which we did get here. It's a solid golf game, more of a traditional golf game where it's all overhead and whatnot. And the reason I say that will become clear in a minute. It's a perfectly good golf game. I think everybody knows by now that I do love me some old golf games. One of the things that I think sometimes it's more interesting, there are a lot of games that like Super Nintendo games that shove things like Mode 7 down your throat. Like PGA Tour Golf would be a good example, or like Madden, the first Madden game I think did that. But it's interesting to see some other games that use it in a more like subtle and tasteful manner, which is how it should have been used to begin with. And like with Hal's Hole-in-One Golf, it shows a still shot here, but this is when it would happen, is like when you putt, when the ball gets really close to the hole, it does this really cool zoom in thing on the hole, which, is only possible because of, Mode 7 scaling of a background layer. So it's just pretty neat. But yeah, I mean, it's a solid game. And then down here is Pilot Wings. I find it weird that as the third launch game, Pilot Wings got reviewed here, but they didn't put the review over in the review crew section. But whatever. It gets straight 8s, which, I would say that's fair. Of the 3 launch games, it's the only one that I would say could certainly just be a weekend rental. I mean, I would have wanted to buy it back then, but I wouldn't blame somebody for saying that, they could just grab it for a weekend and then just be done with it. Populous, as I've said about this type of game before, why would you play a game like that on a home console unless it was the only choice that you had? I mean, that's what's nice about the fact those games would come out on home consoles, is that I understand that not even just that not everybody had a computer at home, but that most people didn't have a computer at home. So, I mean, that's kind of nice, but it's just not the kind of game I'd want to play on a computer. Down here, though, so this is an interesting game, Super Deformer. So that game came out in Japan. It's called SD, The Great Battle, SD standing for Super Deformer. And apparently it was like a series of games. The reason it's called Super Deformer is that the characters in the game are super deformed. So, like the 3 characters you can play as are an Ultraman character, a Kamen Rider character, and a Gundam character. But they're all like chibi versions, right? They're like the little short, with big heads and like kind of like Hot Shots Golf characters. But it's actually now, I mean, obviously the game is all in Japanese, so I can't, there's like, the intro stuff and, you go meet people and they're talking to you and, obviously I don't know what any of them are saying, but, I mean, the game's got, I think it's really fun. I mean, it's got really good graphics, good music. It's just like an overhead, free roaming, sort of shooting type game. Like you're, using one of your characters to shoot people with whatever weapon that you have. And it almost kind of seems like, similar to Zelda in some ways, but it's kind of a shame it didn't come out here. I understand why it didn't come out here, just because those, unless you were someone that was really into watching like anime or something, you probably weren't even really familiar with Kamen Rider, Ultraman, or the Gundam series. But it's even not being able to speak the language, I would say, if you've never heard of this game and never played it, it's worth checking out. It's SD, the Great Battle. So if you get like a ROM set of Japanese Super Famicom ROMs, it'll be in there. SD, the Great Battle. And I think there's other Super Deformer games as well. I haven't played any of those. But the reason I think it's interesting or odd that this didn't come out here is that over here you have Ultraman, which did come out here. But this isn't like a deformed Ultraman. It's just a regular Ultraman. But it's just basically a one-on-one fighting game. And maybe if you're someone that's like a fan of Ultraman, then maybe you'd think this game is kind of cool. I don't think it's horrible, but I mean, they say in here it looks like it'll be a sleeper hit, and I definitely don't agree with that. It's not super horrible, but if you're looking to play a one-on-one fighting game, why in the world would you play Ultraman? Up here, so this is why I mentioned about Hal's Hole-in-One Golf being just like a standard overhead golf game, is that here you have what they're calling T&E Golf, which only because I guess T&E was the company that made this game and made many other golf games, but this came out as True Golf Classics YLA Country Club. Also a very solid golf game, but this is a third person golf game. It's got sort of the pseudo 3D going on, so there's a little bit more drawing and stuff like that. The game plays a little bit more slowly, but really good music, good atmosphere, good golf game. One thing I think is kind of funny about it, not even funny, I don't know, just interesting, but when you set up your game, you have to pick what game style you want and whatnot, and then you pick your caddy. When you pick your caddy, there's these 4 pictures of these 4 guys that can be your caddy, but they're clearly digitized like actual photographs. And like just looking at it, it's like those have to be like just guys that worked at T&E. Like maybe those are like the guys that programmed the game. In a way, it just seems like it's kind of like a little Easter egg or something. So I don't know, I think that's kind of cool. But anyway. And then above that is Super Mario World, which we already talked about. And above that is Sim City, which I've mentioned before. It's a shame that the Super Nintendo version of Sim City is not compatible with the Super Nintendo mouse. But that, of course, is because the Super Nintendo mouse had not come out yet. But it's still worth playing. I mean, even after what I just said about Populous, like Sim City on the Super Nintendo has enough of its own charm that I'll put up with having to play the game with a controller. So now we're done with reviews, but now we just have more of these capsule previews. And so I'm going to kind of go through these a little bit faster because there's some of these that I really just don't have anything to say about. But the first one over here is Space Megaforce, which is one of my favorite, maybe my favorite shooter on the Super Nintendo. That was released in Japan as Super Aleste, so it's one of the Aleste games developed by Compile. And Compile also developed Blazing Lasers on the TurboGrafx and PC Engine, although it was Gunhead on the PC Engine. But, if you play this game, you see a lot of similarities with Blazing Lasers, and even like, some of the artwork is the same and some of the sound effects are the same. But, I love Blazing Lasers as well as the Soldier series, which is sort of Blazing Lasers adjacent. And I think that's why I like Space Megaforce so much. Just a really good game. What else we got here? Dream TV, which I played a little bit, didn't seem very good. Home Alone, I mean, people have good things to say about the Home Alone game. I just personally haven't played it very much, so I don't really have an opinion. Hyperzone, I remember Hyperzone was one of the games on that 1991 video where, I tried something different with that video where there were some 1991 games that didn't really get featured. And so at the end of the video, I said something about like, games released in 1991, not featured in this episode include, and then I listed off a bunch of games. And I believe that's where Hyperzone ended up. Like if you just look at like still shots of it, like Hyperzone looks like an F-Zero clone. And in fact, they even mention F-Zero here in the blurb, but the game really is nothing like F-Zero at all. It's a rail shooter. So I don't really even understand why they're making comparisons with F-Zero, aside from the fact that it uses Mode 7. Although here you get both the ground and the ceiling are background layers. I think they're mirror images of each other, actually. But I mean, it's a decently fun rail shooter. You could rent it for the weekend and have some fun with it, but not something you would have wanted to buy back in the day. I used to have a copy of this game and I got rid of it. Legend of the Mystical Ninja. Platform game. Again, well regarded, but it wasn't really my cup of tea, so I didn't hang on to it. But very much my cup of tea is Castlevania 4, which, I certainly don't think that Super Castlevania 4 is the best Castlevania game. Like, I think that would be a ridiculous statement, but it might be my favorite. And, making the clear distinction that something can be your favorite and you can acknowledge that that doesn't make it the best one. Down here, they're calling this Caveman Ninja. Maybe it was called Caveman Ninja in Japan. I don't know. Here it got released as Joe and Mac. Pretty forgettable game, in my opinion. Super Ghouls and Ghosts. That one got talked about at length in the 1991 video. It's a Ghosts and Goblins game, so it's very hard, but it's also really, really good. Down here is Super Adventure Island. I talked about earlier, I love all the Adventure Island games. They're really good. But Super Adventure Island, once again, Yuzo Koshiro did the soundtrack for it. And, being that the other Adventure Island games came out on inferior hardware, you would not be surprised to see that Super Adventure Island and its sequel, Super Adventure Island 2, have like the best graphics in the series. And then over here, there's not too much to talk about. I mean, Lemmings. Lemmings is a great game, but I don't associate it with the Super Nintendo. Paperboy 2, RoboCop 3, The Simpsons. But then down here, you've got Smash TV. On the Super Nintendo, it of course came out as Super Smash TV. But, it's a home port of the Eugene Jarvis arcade game. Eugene Jarvis is one of the absolute legends in arcade game design. He designed Defender, which, older guys, like even older than me especially, will say that Defender was the greatest arcade game of sort of like the golden era of arcade games. But so it's crazy that a guy that made a game like Defender, he also did Robotron 2084. Isn't it 2084? It's 20 something. But yeah, he did Smash TV, and like what an awesome game Smash TV is.
Big money, big prizes. I love it.
There's no way that Eugene Jarvis had not seen The Running Man a few times when he made Smash TV. Super Smash TV, or any version of Smash TV that you play, is just awesome. But I mean, it's crazy. Even this version, Super Smash TV, is so bloody that it amazes me that Nintendo allowed it to come out. Like, I'm glad they did. But if you play that game, it way more seems like something that you would have seen on the Genesis, which I believe it also did come out on the Genesis. Oh, that's Space Megaforce. What was I looking at before? Sorry, there's a little bit of glare. Oh, I'm so sorry. This is Dimension Force. I can barely read this because of the glare, and red on pink is not a good combination. So Dimension Force was released here as D-Force. And it's an okay shooter. So it uses Mode 7 for the backgrounds, but it uses them in a way that's, I guess, kind of tasteful. But I mean, it's an okay shooter. I don't even really have that much to say about it. It's pretty forgettable. But yeah, that's funny I made that mistake. But like I said, the glare. So there is Space Megaforce. If you've never played it, you should. Next one down here is Radio Flyer. So Radio Flyer never came out. Apparently Radio Flyer was supposed to be similar to Pilot Wings. So I'll just say up front, I've also never seen the movie, but speculation online is that the reason the game was canceled is that the game was a movie tie-in, and I guess the movie Radio Flyer is about, like, it's either about child abuse or, features child abuse. I've never seen the movie, so I'm not sure. So you can understand why at some point somebody might have said, hey, wait a minute, why are we making a video game based on that? But I don't even know if there's a playable ROM out there, so I just don't know anything about the game. What else do we have over here? Chessmaster, Faceball, Shanghai. I don't know why. I just have a soft spot for these, mahjong tile matching games. Shanghai. I remember I played it on the Apple II GS back in the day. I got kind of addicted to it on the Game Boy, but I think a couple of these Shanghai games came out on the Genesis and Super Nintendo, and for whatever reason, I just think they're fun. They're like mindless fun. Up here is Super R-Type, which I have to say I was pretty disappointed by. I think that was like one of the first games that got covered in the 1991 episode, because it was a very, very early release after launch. And, I love R-Type on the TurboGrafx or just wherever. And Super R-Type, I thought, was a pretty big letdown. And, there's Wanderers for me, so we already kind of talked about that. Ultrabots, Draken, that was another game that got mentioned in sort of like the games we're not going to talk about at the end of the 1991 video. Final Fantasy II, I've played through like most of Final Fantasy II, but I never did beat it. I think I was playing it like over spring break one time in college, and I just ran out of Spring Break before I ran out of Final Fantasy 2. So American Gladiators, it always bums me out when I see those, because like I used to love that TV show, and they just really never managed to make a good game, in my opinion, based on the show. And then Bill Lambert's Combat Basketball was another game that didn't really get talked about in the 1991 video. And then we just get to sort of a bunch of sports games, which nothing really here I'm going to talk about, I don't think. Lakers versus Celtics from EA. Nolan Ryan Baseball, which is just, that was a game in Japan called, I think, like Super Stadium or something. And they just slapped Nolan Ryan's face on the box and released it here in North America. PGA Tour Golf, like I said before, just a game that really, like, you know, rams Mode 7 down your throat when it doesn't need to be there. I'm not sure I've ever even played Super NES Play Action Football. I didn't really like NES Play Action Football on the NES, so there you go. WWF Superstars, like I said, just not really my cup of tea. And John Madden Football, I don't know if I'm confusing it with a different Madden game on the Super Nintendo, but I just kind of remember that one using a lot of Mode 7. And I also remember this game, I thought this game got delayed a few times. Am I wrong on that? I know it came out in 91, but I feel like it got delayed. Anyway, and then, you know, here it talks about other great Super NES titles. And just because I noticed they have UN Squadron here, which was a decent game, not my favorite. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, which I assume is Turtles in Time. Zelda 3, which has already gotten mentioned a couple of times. Hook, I'm not really into Hook, but I had a friend who like really thought that like Hook for the Super Nintendo was this great game. Here's a few. Here's an ad for regular EGM. Here's an ad for Super Gaming, which I don't know if I mentioned this already. I bought an issue of Super Gaming so that we can do a read through of it. Maybe I'll do that one next. Who knows? And then over here is MicroGaming, which I guess, I think we're just entering the MicroGaming section of the magazine. So there you go. Ad for Light Boy. We've talked about that before. Apparently it's the year of the sequel, Metroid 2, Final Fantasy 2, Double Dragon 2. I think it gets mentioned again later on, but Metroid 2 is a standout game on the original Game Boy. Oh, here's Castlevania 2, Belmont's Revenge. So, I mean, this game's not perfect either. I really don't like the Castlevania Adventure on the Game Boy, which is like the first Castlevania game on the system. But because it feels like you're walking around with like concrete boots on. And Castlevania 2 kind of makes that at least a lot better. The game is far more playable. I mean, if you like Castlevania games and you've never played this one, you should check it out. If you're someone that kind of drank the Castlevania 2 Kool-Aid as far as the NES goes, and you don't want to play that game because the angry video game nerd said not to or whatever, Castlevania 2 for the Game Boy is not like a Game Boy port of that game. It's a regular Castlevania game, so you should check it out. Over here is Navy SEALs. So I've never seen the movie Navy SEALs. I've never played a Navy SEALs game. It's just whenever I see this, I just think of that line in Clerks, you know, ooh, Navy SEALs. So whatever. Choplifter 2, that's a cool game actually. So I mean, I like the original Choplifter. I think the Master System though had the best version of Choplifter, although I originally played it on the Commodore 64. So you know, this is a sequel. I don't know what else this may have come out on. I don't know if this is a port of a game from somewhere else or if it was purpose developed for the Game Boy. But I mean, if you like Choplifter, it's kind of just more Choplifter. Like the first, they're only really showing screenshots here from the first level, and the first level plays very much like standard Choplifter. Like you take off from a landing pad and you go pick up, you know, hostages or MIA guys or whoever, and you know, you have to shoot tanks and whatnot. But once you get past the first level, like you get into flying through like caverns and stuff. I mean, it really builds quite a bit on the you know, Choplifter dynamic or whatever. But and it's a really cool game, but I think it also translates really well to a Game Boy game, you know, because each stage is pretty short. So it's very pick up and play, and it uses a password-based save system. So if you're someone that likes Choplifter, check it out. And then over here is an ad from Irem. I haven't checked out Kung Fu Master on the Game Boy, but I have played R-Type, and I just kind of have mixed feelings about it, because on one hand, I feel like they really managed to preserve a lot of sort of what R-Type is on the Game Boy, and I feel like in that sense, it's like a technical achievement. But at the same time, I don't think they preserved enough of it to make it a viable alternative, especially in this day and age, to playing either a console version of it or just playing the arcade version of it. So, I don't like talking about how, games don't age well or whatever, because what does that even mean? But, I appreciate what they tried to do with R-Type, but I don't think it really worked. Speaking of that, here's hard driving for the Lynx. And so I checked this one out, and, on one hand, I admire the fact they tried to bring out hard driving on the Lynx. I mean, I guess technically the Lynx is a 16-bit system, but, and it's not like it's that much worse than the Genesis version, but that's really not saying anything, because the Genesis version of hard driving is terrible. But, I mean, you can literally count the frames while you're playing this game. But, even then I could kind of forgive it, but the control is just terrible. It's very difficult to drive because it just feels like you constantly oversteer, which is kind of a shame, because, I've talked about it before, but I used to love playing hard driving in the arcade, and I would always only play it one time because it was much more expensive than any other game. I talked about Roland's Curse in a previous read through, but I don't remember if I mentioned this last time, but Jeremy Parrish did an episode of his show talking about Roland's Curse, and it's definitely worth checking out. I mean, the game is worth checking out, but you should check out Jeremy Parrish's video. And then now we get into some of these capsule previews. Here's Adventure Island 2 for the Game Boy, which is like a portabilized version of Adventure Island 3 for the NES and Famicom. This game actually didn't come out here until like 1992 or 1993, but yeah, I can't say for sure how faithful of a port it is. I haven't like extensively played Adventure Island 3 for the NES, but from what I have played, it seems like it's a pretty accurate conversion, and at least in my opinion, is a very impressive Game Boy title, and is definitely worth your time if you have even a passing interest in the Adventure Island series. Although obviously I could also just say that if you're going to play Adventure Island 3, you might as well just play it on the NES. And the reason that it's called Adventure Island 2 on the Game Boy is simply because it's the second Adventure Island game released for the Game Boy. Aerostar is like a shooter, like a vertically scrolling shooter. I very, very much don't like that game. I don't recommend you play it. And then here is Cycle Grand Prix. Again, we already talked about Cycle Grand Prix being released on the PC Engine as Racing Damashi. And the same thing happened here. So this game came out in Japan as Racing Damashi and never came out here. I would say, again, on a technical level, the game is very impressive. Like, the game runs very smoothly. It's very playable. I'm not sure why you want to play it now, but, I'll tip my cap to whoever programmed that game, because it turned out quite well. And then down here is Final Fantasy Legend 2. I've never played any of the Game Boy Final Fantasy Legend games. I'm told I should check them out, but I have not made the time to do so yet. And then here is Double Dragon 2, Faceball 2000. And then here's yet another magazine ad. This was something that they did publish for at least a little while, which was a computer gaming centric magazine. More capsule previews. I'm trying to think of what in here I even want to talk about. Standout title on this page is definitely Metroid 2. Metroid 2 Return of Samus, I believe. It's really, really good game. It's one of the reasons I don't understand, like, when you play, Mega Man on the Game Boy, it just runs a little bit slower. And you play Castlevania on the Game Boy, it runs a little bit slower, compared to playing them on the NES. But, like, somehow I feel like you play Metroid 2 on the Game Boy, and the game runs just like really, really well. So, if you like Metroid, if you for some reason never played Metroid 2, definitely a game that is worth your time. And then over here on the other page, not really seeing anything that I care too much about. There's TMNT 2, and there's The Simpsons. That's probably about all there is worth talking about on that page. Uh-oh. There we go. A little stuck together action here. So here's the Super Famicom Times. So this was a feature that they started putting in the magazine. I don't know if it was late in 1990 or not until 1991, but it was like, after games started coming out for the Super Famicom in Japan, they started talking about them in EGM, and so they had the Super Famicom Times. I feel like usually the Super Famicom Times is bigger than this, but they already talked about all of the Super Famicom games coming out elsewhere, so they didn't leave themselves much to talk about here. But here they give a whole page to Zelda 3, and you talk about like your pile of shame, games that you haven't gotten around to playing yet. And this came up on a recent episode of the podcast that Corey and I are doing together. Here's my question for you. I'll have a link down in the video description. And I mentioned on the show that, Zelda Link to the Past is a game that I still haven't really played. I mean, I've played it a little bit, but I haven't sat down with it and given it the time that it deserves. So who knows, maybe this Christmas break, I'll do that. But, as I've mentioned before, I didn't have a Super Nintendo until like 2004. And, maybe if I had picked up Link to the Past right away, I would have blown through it. But I guess by the time I got it, I was just playing other things and just haven't played it yet. So, and then this is the only other page, I believe, of the Super Famicom Times. And I mean, it's Super Pro Wrestling from Human, Super Formation Soccer from Human, and Dungeon Master. So not really anything worth talking about. Now we get into like tricks. And, it's funny. So this magazine was probably being prepared at around the same time as that Genesis buyer's guide that we just looked at a couple months ago. And some of this stuff is taken directly. Either this stuff is taken out of that magazine or that stuff was taken out of this magazine. I don't know which. Here's the Sonic the Hedgehog level select code. Here's how to max out your lives. Punisher for Game Boy. I never got into the Punisher. I was really never that much into reading comic books, so I don't really know if this is a good game or not. Dungeon Explorer code. What do you get? Special code for Mighty Warlock. If you would like to have an extremely strong character from the beginning of the game, use this code. You will become a Warlock at the 17th level and should be able to fly right through the game. Well, that's kind of cool. And then down there is a trick for Last Alert. Here is Bard's Tale for the NES. Probably another game that if you have the choice, you would rather play on a home computer. But if you don't have the choice, then here it is on the NES. More Sonic the Hedgehog. Secret power-up. And so this is just telling you where a one-up and some sneakers are on one of the levels. Last Ninja for NES. I don't think I've played that one. Game Gear Shinobi. That's a good game. What is this even an ad for? Oh, NTV. Isolated Warrior and Power Mission. I don't know. More tricks. I just don't get as excited about reading about tricks, especially for something like Wampum or TV Sports Football. FCI Hotline. Oh, Tecmo, you've tried the rest. Now play the best. Maybe. I don't know. Bad News Baseball is pretty good. And, of course, Ninja Gaiden 2. Oh, Solomon's Club. Have I talked about that before? Solomon's Key is one of my favorite NES games. And Solomon's Club is a very good follow-up to the game on the Game Boy. If you like Solomon's Key, you should check out Solomon's Club. So now we get into some NES capsule previews. So what do we got? Batman Return of the Joker. I haven't really played that game. Like I love the original Batman on the NES, but I haven't spent any time with Return of the Joker. Tecmo Super Bowl. Some people think that's like the greatest football game ever made. I played the original Tecmo Bowl, and by the time Tecmo Super Bowl came out, I wasn't really playing. Like by 1991, I was barely playing my NES anymore. So, like Wizards and Warriors 3, I haven't played that. Bioforce Ape, for a long time. So Bioforce Ape never came out, and for a long time it was like a lost game. Like there was no known, working, prototype ROM for it. And there is now. Somebody found one, but there wasn't for a long time. And so somebody pulled this awesome prank on the digital press forums, making fake screenshots for it and getting people all, but they were like ridiculous, but people were so excited. Like, oh, it's Bioforce Ape, that they didn't see that like the screenshots were like ridiculously, obviously fake, but whatever. NES Open Tournament Golf might be the best golf game on the NES. So that's worth checking out. Star Wars is okay. Anything here? Well, there's Dragon Warrior 3 again. Even just looking at those screenshots, it makes me want to go play Dragon Warrior 3. And, the Game Boy Color is a decent way to play those games just because it knocks down on the amount of grinding you have to do and makes the games easier. But I never really minded all the grinding in Dragon Warrior. It was like a mindless thing to do. So like if I was going to play Dragon Warrior 3, I think I'd rather just play the original NES version. There's Game Dude. Hey, I've been to Game Dude. Game Dude, as far as I know, is still there down in LA or in the LA area. Anything cool here? Nothing here. I mean, you guys tell me. Nothing here I see that I think is particularly noteworthy. Monster in My Pocket. I just remember when those toys were really popular, I forgot how many came in the package, but they were kind of like little, plasticized rubber toys, similar to like Muscle Men as far as the size goes, but they came in different colors. And I just remember, Monster in My Pocket, if you want a complete in the box copy of that game, you have to it came with a special, little Monster in My Pocket figure that only came with that game. So if you want like a proper, complete copy of that game, you have to get it with that special figure. There's Chip's Challenge. I didn't know that came out on the NES. I guess I still don't. Maybe it didn't come out on the NES. It even says here, commonly known to Lynx players, because it was a somewhat popular, I guess, game. It's a game they printed a lot of copies for the Lynx, because at least up until recently, you could still buy brand new copies of it for cheap. I don't know if that's the case anymore. Below it is Contra Force, and that's sort of one of the famously rare and expensive games for the NES. And it's funny because you might think, why would a Contra game be rare and expensive for the NES? And the reason is that Konami developed that game for the Famicom, and it wasn't a Contra game. I forgot. It was called Arkhound. I don't know, what does that even mean, Arkhound? And for some reason, it got canceled. But I guess they'd gotten far enough along in the game that somebody decided, like, hey, let's release this game in North America, and we'll just rebrand it as a Contra game. So it was supposed to come out here in 1991, and it was going to basically be Contra 3. And for that reason, the Super Nintendo version of Contra was originally going to be Contra 4, the Alien Wars, instead of Contra 3. But then Contra Force got delayed, so that it was going to come out after the Alien Wars, and so they changed the title from of Alien Wars from Contra 4 to Contra 3. So kind of an interesting little tidbit. I mean, it's an okay game. I think it's brutally difficult. And I'm someone like, I love Contra, I love Super C, and I feel like you play Contra Force and it has like that quality and the production value that a Konami game should have, that you expect. But there's just a lot of cheap dying in that game. But I still think if you like Contra games, if you've never played Contra Force and you have a flash cart or whatever, you should definitely check it out. Over here, hey, there's a golf game that I've never played. That's shocking. Super Real Golf Grand Slam by Atlas. Just check that out. Tiny Toon Adventures. I just remember that show being real popular when I was a kid. I don't know if the game's any good. Where in Time is Carmen Sandiego? Roger Clemens MVP Baseball. Oh, Bucky O'Hare. That's another game that's expensive now. We get into a few TurboGrafx previews here. Anything really good? Not really. I mean, nothing I'm excited about anyway. But on the other side, we've got some Neo-Geo games, and we've got some cool stuff. First up here is League Bowling. I used to have a copy of League Bowling, but I ended up selling it. The thing with League Bowling, and I would say the exact same thing about Windjammers, is that League Bowling is really, really fun if you have at least one other person to play it with. Better if you have more than one person to play it with. League Bowling, you could link, like if you had two systems or two arcade cabinets, you could plug a cable literally into the League Bowling cartridge on two cartridges to connect them, and then you could play like 4-player. I've never done that. But, I mean, it's a solid game. It's just, to me, I think if you play by yourself, I think it gets boring kind of quickly. It would just be way more fun to play multiplayer. And like I said, I would say the exact same thing about Windjammers. Like, everybody loves Windjammers, but if you're playing it yourself, I think it's not really, it gets old pretty fast. And then over here is Ghost Pilots, which, a lot of earlier Neo-Geo games seemed to be heavily inspired by other video games. And, so Ghost Pilots really just seems like SNK's version of like 1942. And it's not a bad game. In fact, when I got rid of most of my Neo-Geo games, I did keep my copy of Ghost Pilots. But I just find like your plane is too slow, and all the sprites are really just kind of too big. I feel like the game sort of has like the tuning of a vertical, like a Tate mode game, but it's horizontally oriented, as are all Neo-Geo games. And so I feel like the screen feels very crowded and very constricted. And so that game could be, with some simple tweaks, that game could have been a lot better, unfortunately. Legend of Success Joe, I've never played. But then down here is the first Sengoku. So Sengoku was a series of beat-em-up games on the Neo-Geo with kind of I know it's a beat-em-up game, so it's like, who cares about the plot? But, it's kind of interesting. It's like this feudal era Japan warlord who can travel through time and like travels to the modern era to try to do whatever it is that evil feudal warlords do. The first couple of Sengoku games don't play great. They're okay. I mean, if you like beat 'em ups, I don't think that like Streets of Rage really had anything to worry about as far as Sengoku goes, but they're like decent, like solid games that are worth checking out. But the one that's really good is Sengoku 3, which came out in like 2001. It was a very late release. Really, really cool beat 'em up game. And then finally we get into some Genesis previews. And, it's funny. So the first game over here is Golden Axe 2. And I feel like for the longest time on the show, like I've tried to sort of like couch what I say about Golden Axe 2, because I know that a lot of people like that game. But, secretly, or not even that secretly, I guess, like I really don't care for it. And the other day I was hanging out with Corey, and we were talking about the games that are included on the Genesis Mini 2 that came out recently, and Golden Axe 2 is on there. And so I kind of tried to like, feel them out. I was like, well, what do you think about, like, I didn't want to say it first, so I was like, what do you think about Golden Axe 2? And he was like, oh yeah, that game's trash. And I was like, oh, thank goodness. I should know, Corey and I are often in agreement. I just, the first Golden Axe is one of my favorite Genesis games, and Golden Axe 2 is just not a worthy follow-up to that game. Like, it kind of makes me angry a little bit how bad it is compared to the first game. Like, the worthy follow-up was Revenge of Death Adder, but that, of course, never came out on a home console, sadly. And then, speaking of Corey and of the Genesis Mini 2, Rolling Thunder is also on that one. And that's a game that I had never played. And, he was talking about what a great game it is, and he played it a little bit. But he was telling me, like, oh, you got to check that game out. So I ended up loading it up on my EverDrive, and it is a pretty cool game. So I'm planning on spending some more time with that one. And then Toe Jam and Earl we just talked about last time on Let's Read, so I'm going to skip that. I can't remember if we talked about Quack Shot. I'm getting tired, sorry. Or not. Quack Shot is a great game on the Genesis. It's the proper follow-up to Castle of Illusion. There were, I think, 3 games on the Genesis that in Japan were all part of the same series called I Love Mickey. And it was Castle of Illusion, Quack Shot, and then World of Illusion. I mean, I have a hard time saying that Quack Shot is the best game of the 3, but you could make an argument for it. Just great presentation, like awesome graphics, the sound, but the gameplay is just awesome. It's like a showcase game for the Genesis, in my opinion. And then down here is Mercs. So Mercs was a Capcom arcade game that was ported to the Genesis. A lot of Capcom arcade games got ported to the Genesis by Sega, and I believe that's the case with Mercs. Overhead, free-roaming run-and-gun game, like an Akari Warriors, Shock Troopers style game. Really good game. Over on this side, Growl. We talked about Growl once before on a read-through. Growl's kind of a cool game. It's a beat-em-up game. It's got really small sprites, which might sound bad, but it kind of makes the screen overall a little bit bigger. And it's got just an interesting plot in that, like, you're fighting against, like, you know, animal poachers or something, which at least is bringing something new to the table. And then the other games on this page, I haven't really played that much. I believe that Master of Monsters is a game that some people hold in high regard. I don't believe I've played it. What do we got over here? Shadow of the Beast. If you're going to play Shadow of the Beast, play it on the Amiga. But, you know, I would say that, like, the best thing about Shadow of the Beast is the music. It has incredible music. The gameplay, I think, kind of sucks. I don't understand why that game is as popular as it is, but it's worth checking out just to hear the music. Vapor Trail down here, another renovation shooter. Perfectly good shooter is just the main. Whenever I see Vapor Trail, the main thing I think of is, like, whenever you pause the game, it has that digitized voice that says Vapor Trail. But, I mean, it's a cool game, worth checking out. Nothing else over here that I'm particularly into. Valis Sid, that's Sid of Valis. I don't know why they're calling it Valis Sid. Another shooter there, Task Force Harrier EX. There's El Viento from Renovation. I think I mentioned that earlier. Very Valis style, side-scrolling action game, but another game that is held in high regard by people. And here we've got 4 more Genesis games. There's Buck Rogers. I've talked about this before, maybe on the other channel, but Buck Rogers is one of my favorite Genesis games. It's a SSI gold box role-playing game on home computers. The Genesis version is kind of like a I can't talk anymore. It's a simplified or, like, dumbed down. I don't like to say dumbed down. It's not like it's dumb, but it's like, you know, they turned it into something that was more appropriate for a home console. So the game is a little bit, like I said, simpler, but it also has better graphics and sound. But I think it's a really fun game. Even though it's a role-playing game, you can blow through it in like 10 hours or less. So totally worth checking out. That's probably my favorite. And this is going to be like a controversial statement. But, well, same thing I was saying earlier about Castlevania. I don't think it's the best role-playing game on the Genesis, but it's my favorite. And then there's Decap Attack, another game that people seem to like. I think it's kind of okay. And then here's a couple of Sega Master System games, Pat Riley Basketball and Populous. I didn't know either one of those came out on the Master System. And then there is Outrun, but that is for the Game Gear. Which, again, if Outrun came out on the Master System in 1987, why is it just barely coming out on the Game Gear in 1991? I don't know. And then we get a few Electro Brain ads, which here's another example, like no screenshots in these ads. But I will say, very cool artwork. This is kind of my least favorite, but it's still pretty cool, Go-Go Tank. But then, like, look at this Dead Heat Scramble. That's really cool ad. And then here, Fist of the North Star, also very cool. But hold on, I didn't realize more Genesis previews. Anything cool over here? Super Kicks. I like the Kicks games. They're pretty good. Yep. U.S. National Video Game Team, high score. I noticed finally, because this was a feature in all of the earlier EGM issues, but like at the beginning of EGM, it was like all people who worked for the magazine, because a lot of those guys were on the U.S. National Video Game Team. So it's nice to see that like these are mostly names that I don't recognize, which I assume means that it's people who wrote in, although Martin Alessi is still over here for Super Contra. Game Over page was something they did for a while. So here's Gyrus, and it's showing here's like the final battle and what I assume are still shots of the final cutscene. Here's an ad for Super Spy Hunter. If I'm going to play Spy Hunter, I'm going to play regular Spy Hunter. And then on the back cover is Crystal Quest for the Game Boy, which I kind of anticlimactic end to such an awesome issue. I don't know there must have originally been something stapled to the outside of this, because there's a little remnant of it there. But anyway, there is EGM issue 25 from August of 1991. In my opinion, first-rate issue of the magazine. So that's about a 2-hour episode, so my throat hurts now. But that's going to do it for this episode of Classic Gaming Quarterly. As always, thanks for watching. See you next time.